Welcome to another deep dive. We're going to be exploring how to come up with startup ideas.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, and you've brought some Paul Graham essays,
I have.
which are always a fantastic place to start.
Definitely insightful. Let's jump right in with crazy new ideas. One thing that stood out was Graham's point about being cautious about dismissing outlandish ideas.
Right, especially when they come from experts.
Exactly.
It's like they might be seeing something that we're just not.
Totally.
And he brings up the efficient market principle from finance.
Yeah, that was really interesting.
Yeah, he argues that the craziest ideas, if they're right, often have the biggest impact. Just like in markets.
It makes you think twice before dismissing something as too out there.
For sure. Especially if it's coming from someone who's deeply knowledgeable in their field.
Right. It's like the whole Copernicus thing.
Oh, yeah. The Earth revolving around the sun.
Back then, that sounded ludicrous.
A total paradigm shift.
And Graham suggests that experts can sometimes see beyond those prevailing paradigms that limit the rest of us.
It makes you wonder what we're all missing right now.
What seems impossible today could be commonplace tomorrow. It's mind-blowing.
Definitely. So the next time someone pitches an idea that sounds a little wild,
Yeah.
especially if it's coming from an expert.
We shouldn't just dismiss it outright.
Right. Maybe they're onto something that we just haven't grasped yet.
Okay, let's move on to how to get new ideas.
Right.
Graham talks about these things called anomalies, observing things that seem off or missing.
And especially at the frontiers of knowledge where things are changing rapidly.
Yeah. He used stand-up comedy as an example, which I thought was brilliant.
Yeah, how they highlight the absurdity of everyday life, things we barely even notice.
But they're actually kind of strange when you think about it.
Totally. So we should be on the lookout for those anomalies.
Like glitches in the matrix.
Exactly. Those little things that don't quite fit.
And especially in areas where things are evolving quickly.
Right, where those gaps and anomalies are more likely to lead to breakthrough ideas.
Okay, now let's shift gears a bit to how to get startup ideas.
Okay.
Graham really emphasizes solving real problems.
Yes, he warns against getting caught up in made-up or sitcom ideas.
They sound plausible on the surface.
But would anyone actually use them in real life?
Exactly. I remember reading about someone pitching a social network for pet owners.
Yeah, that's a perfect example. It sounds plausible, but is it a problem people are desperate to solve?
Right. Graham says successful startups often start by solving a problem for a smaller, more engaged group.
A group of users who really need a solution.
He uses this great analogy of a well,
You need to find that deep pool of demand.
that group of people who desperately need what you're offering.
And then you can expand from there.
Like Microsoft's success with their basic interpreter for the Altair computer.
Yeah, they started by targeting this tiny group of Altair owners who desperately needed a way to program their new machines.
And that well became the springboard for a whole software empire.
It shows that starting small can lead to huge growth if you find that passionate niche. It's so inspiring. Now let's talk about frighteningly ambitious startup ideas.
Okay. This is where things get interesting.
Graham argues that the most groundbreaking ideas can be intimidating.
Because they challenge our existing worldview.
He uses a scene from the movie Being John Malkovich to illustrate this.
You remember, the character encounters this sophisticated woman,
Mm-hmm.
and she says to him, "If you ever got me, you wouldn't have a clue what to do with me."
That's a powerful analogy.
Right. It's like those big ideas make us question our own capabilities.
Makes you think, am I even good enough for this?
Exactly.
And he gives some examples of these intimidating but potentially revolutionary ideas, like creating a new search engine
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
to rival Google. Seems impossible.
Right. But Graham says even Google has shown signs of weakness.
So there might be room for someone else to come in and shake things up.
Exactly.
And he also talks about replacing email.
Yeah, which, let's face it, has become a bit of a nightmare.
Totally. I'm always drowning in my inbox. He argues that email wasn't designed for the way we use it today.
It's more of a to-do list than anything.
And a pretty terrible one at that. He envisions something faster, more efficient.
Where senders have to be clear about what they want from you.
And recipients have more control over their inbox.
That sounds amazing.
I know, right? He even says he'd be willing to pay a monthly fee for a good email alternative.
That's how much he hates email. Okay, another big one. He mentions replacing universities.
Whoa. Universities have been around forever,
But Graham argues that they might be ripe for disruption.
especially with the rising cost of education and the rise of online learning platforms.
Yeah, he suggests that Y Combinator is a form of alternative education.
Focusing on the skills needed for startups
It's a really interesting idea.
makes you think about the future of education.
Totally. He also throws out the idea of reimagining online entertainment
Some kind of internet drama.
that takes advantage of the speed and interactivity of the web,
He points out that Hollywood has been slow to embrace the internet.
which opens up opportunities for new players.
And he specifically calls out the shortcomings of TV.
Yeah, he even replaced his family's TV with a wall-mounted iMac.
Because they hated the TV interface so much.
That's dedication.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about some pretty big, ambitious ideas.
We have.
Does he offer any advice on how to tackle them?
He does. He says it's often better to start with a deceptively small idea.
And build outward from there.
Like Facebook, for example.
Which started as a simple way for Harvard students to connect.
Even Mark Zuckerberg probably couldn't have predicted what it would become.
It's a reminder that even the most ambitious ventures start somewhere small.
He says the best way to do really big things is to start with deceptively small things.
Like planting a seed that grows into a mighty tree.
Exactly. The initial idea is just a starting point.
It's the journey, the evolution that leads to greatness.
So don't be afraid to start small and see where it takes you.
Okay. I think that's a great place to pause for now.
Sounds good. Welcome back. Ready to dive back into the world of startup ideas?
Absolutely. Last time we talked about how even small ideas can grow into something amazing.
Right, and now we're going to explore some practical advice from Graham's essay, Ideas for Startups.
Okay, let's hear it.
Well, he starts by questioning why we even think it's so hard to come up with startup ideas.
Yeah, it's like this mental block we have.
Right. We assume it must be incredibly difficult because successful startups are worth so much.
But he argues that we overvalue that initial idea.
Most startups end up looking nothing like the founder's original vision anyway.
It's the journey, not the destination.
Exactly. And he suggests something interesting, framing startup ideas as questions instead of assertions.
So instead of saying, I'm going to build a collaborative web-based spreadsheet,
You'd ask, could one make a collaborative web-based spreadsheet?
it shifts the focus from having all the answers to exploring possibilities.
Makes it less intimidating, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're curious and open to possibilities. What's next?
Well, Graham talks about staying upwind.
What does that even mean?
Exposing yourself to new technologies, surrounding yourself with the right people.
Ah, okay.
Universities are great for that, he says.
Yeah, they're full of cutting-edge research and brilliant minds.
Exactly. And he mentions that working on exciting new stuff might pay less in the short term.
But it opens up more options for the future.
It's an investment in your own intellectual growth.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, what about co-founders?
He says practically every successful company has at least two founders.
Makes sense, someone to bounce ideas off of, share the burden.
And he makes this interesting observation about the lack of female startup founders.
What's that?
He wonders if it's related to how people tend to form close friendships with those of the same gender.
That's an interesting thought.
Maybe we need to create more opportunities for women to connect and form those crucial partnerships.
Yeah, definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about how ideas actually form.
All right.
Graham compares it to doodling.
Your mind making those familiar gestures, but in a random way?
It's like letting your subconscious play with ideas.
That's a great way to put it.
So we need to give our minds time to wander and make those unexpected connections.
And he says you have to work at something for a while before you have those breakthrough ideas.
It's like practicing an instrument before you can improvise.
Exactly.
Now, he also says that it's often easier to see the solution than the problem itself.
It's true.
Like, we don't know what we don't know.
And most people actually prefer to ignore problems.
Yeah, problems are no fun.
But entrepreneurs need to find those problems intolerable and believe that a solution is possible.
He gives the example of spam filters back in the early 2000s.
Right, most people just accepted spam as a fact of life.
But Graham was so frustrated by it that he was determined to find a solution.
And that solution turned out to be incredibly effective.
Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've identified a problem that bugs us. What's next?
Yeah, what do we do with it?
Well, Graham reminds us that startup ideas need to be profitable.
They need to solve problems people are willing to pay for. He talks about wealth being what people want.
Right, and while not all good ideas are financially valuable in tech, there's a strong correlation.
So those intellectually stimulating problems might just lead to financial success.
Exactly. He also encourages us to look for ways to make things cheaper and easier to use.
Like Henry Ford did with cars.
Right. He made them affordable for everyone.
It's about democratizing access to technology.
And he says this often involves redefining the problem itself.
Instead of building a better horse-drawn carriage, you invent the car.
That's the classic example. He also stresses the importance of simplicity.
Keeping things user-friendly.
He actually points out that programmers often create terrible user interfaces.
It's like they're trying to confuse users.
He advocates for designing systems that just work.
Like those old-fashioned stoves.
Yeah, the ones with just two knobs, temperature and timer.
No fancy digital displays or error messages.
Exactly. It's all about user experience.
Okay, let's talk about acquisitions.
All right. For most startups, success means getting acquired by a larger company.
And Graham actually encourages entrepreneurs to be open about that goal.
It's about being realistic.
He even suggests a strategy for finding acquisition-worthy ideas.
What's that?
Look at what big companies should be doing and do it yourself.
It's about exploiting their inefficiencies.
Their inability to move as quickly as a startup.
Exactly. Now let's wrap up this part with an intriguing observation from Graham.
Okay, I'm all ears.
He says that the most productive way to generate startup ideas might be by accident.
Wait, what?
He points out that many famous startups weren't intentionally conceived as companies.
They evolved from side projects and personal passions.
Like Steve Wozniak building the first Apple computer because his employer wouldn't let him.
Or Yahoo, starting as Dave Filo's personal collection of links.
Great ideas can come from unexpected places.
It's like chance favors the prepared mind.
Exactly. And Graham's final message in this essay is to do what hackers enjoy doing anyway.
Which is?
Tinker, experiment, build things just for the fun of it.
I love that. It's about passion and ingenuity.
Exactly. Stay curious, follow your instincts, and embrace the joy of creation.
Okay, I'm ready for the final part of our deep dive. What other insights does Graham have for us? Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive. It's been fascinating exploring all these different aspects of startup ideas.
It has. And in this last part, we're going to look at some common pitfalls even smart people can fall into.
Oh, okay, so like cautionary tales.
Exactly. And Graham actually uses his own experience as an example in his essay, Why Smart People Have Bad Ideas.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he talks about this company he co-founded called Artix.
The one that tried to put art galleries online.
That's the one. It turned out to be a classic example of a bad idea.
So what went wrong?
Well, he points to a few things. First, there's what he calls the still life effect.
Still life effect.
It's like when you come up with an idea and just dive in without really evaluating it.
Oh, okay, see.
Like you're so focused on executing it that you don't step back and see the bigger picture.
So you could end up spending a ton of time on something that's just not going to work.
Exactly. And then the second mistake they made with Artix was choosing coolness over profitability.
They prioritize being trendy over making money.
Basically, yeah. They were drawn to the idea of connecting art and the internet, even though it wasn't a very lucrative market.
So they got caught up in the excitement of the idea without thinking about the business side of things.
It happens. But as Graham reminds us, the goal of a company is to make money.
Right, you got to pay the bills somehow.
Exactly. And the third mistake they made was timidity.
Timidity, how so?
They were intimidated by the idea of competing in the crowded e-commerce space.
So they went for a smaller niche.
Yeah, they avoided the big players, even though those big players might not have been as scary as they seemed.
Interesting. So how do we overcome that timidity and find those valuable problems to solve?
Well, Graham has a simple suggestion. Read the Wall Street Journal.
Or Wall Street Journal.
He says those articles are full of descriptions of real-world problems that need solutions.
Ah, okay. So it's about paying attention to what's happening in the world.
Exactly. And he also emphasizes that hackers are perfectly capable of understanding what customers want.
You don't need a business person to tell you.
Right. Hackers can learn to identify user needs. He even recommends reading Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People.
To understand human psychology.
Exactly. It's about combining technical skills with emotional intelligence.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk about Graham's talk. Counterintuitive parts of startups.
All right.
He really stresses that starting a company is counterintuitive.
Yeah, it's like learning to ski your natural instincts often lead you in the wrong direction.
So how do you learn to start a startup?
Well, he says it's not about becoming an expert in startups themselves.
Wait, what?
It's about becoming an expert in your users.
Ah, okay, so understanding their needs and desires is key.
Exactly. He warns against just playing house, mimicking the outward appearances of a startup without building something people actually want.
It's like putting on a costume but not really embodying the role.
That's a great analogy. He says that starting a startup is where gaming the system stops working.
You can't trick users into loving your product.
They're like sharks. They can smell BS a mile away. They only care about whether it solves their problem.
So how do we escape that gaming mindset?
By focusing on solving real problems, not on manipulating investors or playing the startup game.
It's about being genuine and creating something truly valuable.
Exactly. And he also talks about how starting a company is all-consuming like having kids.
Wow, so it's a big life change.
It is. He actually cautions against starting a company too early in life.
Really? Why is that?
He believes your 20s are for exploration and serendipity.
For pursuing your passions and trying new things.
Exactly. Delaying the startup journey can actually increase your chances of success later on.
Interesting. So if I'm in college and want to start a company one day, what should I be doing now?
Learn. Immerse yourself in areas that interest you. Develop deep expertise.
Like Larry Page did with Search, which led to Google.
Exactly. And find co-founders who share your passion.
People who inspire and challenge you.
He suggests working on projects together, building those relationships organically.
It's about finding your tribe.
And finally, he circles back to the idea of accidental startups.
Right, we talked about that earlier.
He argues that the best way to generate ideas is not to consciously try to think of them.
So how do you do it?
By cultivating a mind that has startup ideas unconsciously.
That sounds kind of mystical.
It's about creating the conditions for inspiration to strike.
I see.
Learn about things that matter, work on problems that interest you, and surround yourself with people you admire.
It's about setting the stage for those aha moments.
He encourages us to get to the leading edge of a field, to live in the future, as Paul Bouquet puts it.
When you're immersed in that world, those groundbreaking ideas will come naturally.
Exactly. So if you want to start a company one day, the best thing you can do now is learn, follow your curiosity, and build relationships.
This deep dive has been so insightful. We've covered so much ground.
We have. We've seen how crazy ideas can lead to breakthroughs, how solving real problems is essential, and how the best ideas often come unexpectedly.
So as we wrap up, remember to embrace those crazy ideas, seek out those valuable problems, and stay curious. Who knows what amazing ventures await? Happy building.